Hello, and welcome back.
I wondered if I just didn't say anything, how long you would sit there.
Not very long, apparently.
Yeah. All right. Hello, and welcome back to It's a Very Exciting Time, a podcast by a UFO nerd and his tolerant friend. My name is Scott, and I've been fascinated by the phenomenon my whole life.
And I'm Chuck, and I'm an aerospace nerd and a tolerant friend.
We started this podcast because since 2017, there have been shocking revelations, from news of secret Pentagon programs to confirmed videos of astonishing craft. In a nutshell, now that we know the government has recovered non-human technology.
Or at least we will, once Tim Gallaudet kicks in the door at Johns Hopkins to get the USO records.
It raises a natural question. If UFOs are real, what else? Suddenly, some of these other parts of the phenomenon that seemed unlikely are pulled into the realm of the possible.
And they may still be unlikely, but even if it's new science and not aliens, whew,
it's a very exciting time.
It is an exciting time. And just to remind you, before we get into it, we have, you can find the show notes at veryexcitingtime.com. You can support us by going to patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, where you can find extra content like our Q&A videos and a link to our Discord, which is alive and kicking and has people discussing in it.
Yep.
And
in case we haven't made this clear enough in the previous episodes, the Discord is free. You can join the Patreon as a free level backer, and you gain access to the Discord.
Right, exactly. Did we have a 50 Patreon goal? I feel like there was something. We got to the 30 Patreon goal.
I don't know, buddy. The Patreon's your deal.
No, there was some goal. There was something embarrassing that you were going to do at 50 Patreons.
Probably we were going to start thinking about bonus episodes or something. I don't know.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, maybe I'll...
I think that's tied to paid Patreons.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Yes. Oh, yes. You're right. There was a specific... Was it the raw files?
I don't know. Why don't we figure this out offline?
Yeah, good point. Good idea.
Look for a free post on the Patreon tier when we get our shit figured out.
There's a lot of high quality content like this over there.
All right, man. Today, we are going to talk about a character who's kind of been on the periphery of our UFO stories for the last 2 years. He's relatively new to the scene. Admiral Tim Gallaudet. Now, this guy is a retired U.S. Navy Rear Admiral who has been publicly banging the drum about USOs for about 1.5 to 2 years now.
Okay. And a USO is not the USO show.
Right.
Is that what
unidentified
it stands for?
Submerged object?
Why is there a show about those?
There's not.
Oh.
USO from like World War II, that's a different thing. I don't know what that stands for.
Totally different
United
thing.
Servicemen Organization, something like that.
Quick, GPT. No. Okay, let's carry on.
Yeah. But yeah, so Tim Gallaudet, he's been talking about USOs.
Cool. All right, I'm ready.
Now, you might remember we've been talking about USOs because Representative Luna said that at the next UAP hearing, they were going to talk about USOs. And the UAP Disclosure Act specifically mentions trans-medium craft, meaning craft that go from space to air to water without needing to change format or do anything differently.
Okay, so that makes sense that that Tim Gallaudet, the Navy guy, would care so much about submersible UFOs. But I'm a little surprised given the military stigma. Like, is there extra background in marine science or some other wet field?
Wet field. Yeah.
That's what we call it in the marine sciences.
In the wet sciences.
Yes, exactly.
Tim describes himself this way. He says, I'm a scuba diver and a naturalist. I worked as an oceanographer in the Navy for 32 years and then went into a government agency, and now I'm a private consultant.
Okay, so that feels like maybe downplaying it a little bit. Like maybe there's some extra history in there, but you know,
Just a little bit. Yeah. He has a master's in oceanography and a PhD in marine acoustics from the Scripps Institute of Oceanography at UC San Diego.
okay, that's cool. Hey Siri, what is marine acoustics? Uh huh. Uh huh. Yeah. Okay, she doesn't know, but she did turn on 3 lights. Carry on. I didn't expect this to catch Scott so far off guard.
I didn't read the joke ahead of time. So joking aside, I am not I am not a participant in the wet sciences.
Okay.
Scripps Institution, is that like a big deal? Like Erica's
It
into
is,
this
yeah.
stuff. Is that something you guys have heard about?
Yeah. So Scripps is a big deal. It is a program that Erica was looking at applying to. And yeah, it feels, I don't know, to me, it feels like, I don't want to say the Harvard of, of wet studies.
God damn it.
Yeah, that's it. But yeah, it is a big deal. And I did look up marine acoustics and oceanography.
What's the Ivy League version of wet sciences? Like,
Right.
all right, moving on before this gets too weird.
Yeah. But wait. I do want to say marine acoustics is the study of how sound travels underwater, which is useful for submariners, like sonar and stuff like that. But also, oh, yeah.
Did you know it's pronounced submariners?
Oh, I hate that.
Right? Horrible. I've been saying submariners for years, and I watched a whole bunch of interviews with Tim Gallaudet, and if there's anybody who's going to know, it's him, and he always says submariners, and it's especially weird because he'll say mariners and submariners. I'm like, oh, I don't care for that.
Yeah, don't care for that, but I guess it makes sense. Yeah, so submariners. And then oceanography is like actually a collection of different studies, but the one I think most people are thinking about is mapping the seafloor, which makes sense. You'd need that for Navy ships, but it's also the study of like
mapping, but also weather and wave movement. Like all of this stuff makes sense. The Navy would need to know, like, hey, our ships are going to be traveling through this region. What do we expect? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So it really is actually exactly what it says. It is the study of the ocean and all of her facets.
Yeah. So Gallaudet went to Scripps. He got a PhD in oceanography and marine acoustics, and then he joined the Navy for, he said, 32 years. Again, he's downplaying that a little bit. Obviously, we already know he is a Rear Admiral. Right. He served as the superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory. Then he served as the head oceanographer of the Navy, and then as the commander of the Naval Meteorology and Oceanography Command. And then after he retired from the Navy, he was the acting administrator of NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And now he's a research affiliate for Harvard's Galileo project, and he serves on the boards of both the Sol Foundation and Americans for Safe Aerospace.
God, that is so legit. I know that I'm going to look after 32 years in my career, I'm going to look back and be like, no, this is nothing like that. Like, mad respect.
Yeah, well, I wrote some PHP, and then I did Ruby for a while, and I got really into Node there at the end.
Yeah, and I was really into keyboards, and that was really the highlight.
Yeah. So yeah, he was downplaying it a little bit. You're totally right.
Yeah. Awesome.
When he was talking about NOAA, because I have a vague understanding of
Yeah.
NOAA, something to do with the oceans. Like that's
Yeah. They,
about it. He said,
yeah.
I led NOAA, which is the nation's climate, weather, and ocean agency, and we had 20,000 people, a $7
Shit.
billion annual budget, 18 environmental satellites, 16 ships, 9 aircraft, some of which fly through hurricanes, and a whole armada of boats and scuba divers characterizing and predicting and managing our ocean resources.
Shit. That's a lot. Like, that's a lot more badass than I thought.
Right?
Like, I don't, for some reason, I thought like the U.S. government was like 20,000 people, which is absurd. But
It's a lot more than that, but yeah.
yeah, this is crazy. And
Mhm.
I also like that he specifies 16 ships and a whole armada of boats. Um,
When you're in the Navy, I imagine that difference is quite a bit more substantial than as a
Very
civilian.
important. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. Now, you might be wondering, why does this guy care about aliens? He's a
I
Navy
am.
dude. He said, I had a job where I was the superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory. And by the way, he explains the U.S. Naval Observatory. Like, why does the Navy have an observatory?
Yeah.
Well, because ships used to navigate by star charts. So it's important to
Oh,
have
okay.
good star charts. Why do they
Right.
still have an observatory? Because satellites navigate by star charts. All of our
Oh, shit.
GPS satellites, we position via the GPS satellite. The GPS satellite knows where it is because of star charts, which they have to
Yeah.
update.
I'm embarrassed that I didn't know that.
Same.
But that totally makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. So he said, I had a job where I was superintendent of the U.S. Naval Observatory, and I had a team of astrophysicists that monitored the stars and made star catalogs. I learned a lot about astrophysics in that job, and I came to appreciate how large the universe is. You just cannot conclude when you know that there's 200 to 300 billion stars in our galaxy, and there's hundreds of billions of galaxies. To think that we're alone is incredibly arrogant.
Yeah. I completely agree. And I love this so much. I wish we could just talk about this for an hour, but I also can hear our audience shifting and getting anxious because we're not getting weird enough. So let's get to the good stuff, Vandahay.
All right. Okay. Speaking to Ross Coulthart on News Nation, and this is the quote that kind of brought him to my attention, like, oh, shit. Tim Gallaudet said, I think it's about time that we disclose that we're in contact with non-human intelligence. That's what
Wow.
needs to be put out there to the public.
All right. Now we're talking.
On the Big Thing podcast, he said, quote, we're experiencing a non-human higher intelligence. They possess craft that can do things we can't explain, with technology we can't explain, and with laws of physics that are not what we know them to be.
Wow. So he sounds pretty damn certain. Has he witnessed this or
Kind of,
yeah.
sort of. He has a story about a secret Navy email that we'll get to, but
Okay.
the reason he says he's so confident, he says, quote, I am completely convinced because I know the people who were in the government legacy programs that oversaw both the crash retrieval and analysis of UAP data. I am very confident in these people, former intelligence, former DoD, and we are working as a team behind the scenes to advance disclosure.
Okay. So it sounds very similar to Grush. He's trying to help elevate their voices in a safe way. And I
Yeah.
super duper respect that.
Totally. And similar to Grush, people are going to be inclined to dismiss him because he doesn't have firsthand knowledge. But I will just remind people of what we said about Grush. When your job is to collate data and evaluate sources,
Yeah.
and you come to me and say, I have multiple sources that I have a high degree of confidence in, that's not the same as me saying, like, yeah, I talked to a guy at the airport once who saw a UFO. Like,
Right.
he's saying he knows the people who are in these programs directly. That's
Right.
a big deal. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. Makes sense.
And
And you don't want your admirals driving the radar. You
yeah,
really need them collating all that and trying to make decisions based on it.
absolutely. In an interview with Liberation Times, he said, I do know from the people I trust who have had access to some of these programs that there are different types of non-human intelligence visiting us. We still don't understand their intentions, which is worthy of serious research and discussion instead of putting our heads in the sand.
Hell yeah. Just like Big Daddy Lou banging the drum of, shouldn't we be looking at these things?
Right? The bar is so low.
Yeah.
Like, can we just stop pretending there's nothing up there, guys?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like that elephant over there, it is in the room. Let's talk about it.
Yeah. Now, we're going to start with his big story that he always tells when he gets interviewed is about this secret U.S. Navy email. Now, I've actually told a version of this story on the podcast before, so forgive me if you've heard this before, but he gets a little more into detail here. I think it's worth covering it again. So he kind of outlined this when he gave a talk at the Sol Foundation last year.
Oh, cool.
He said, when I was a 1-star admiral working for U.S. Fleet Forces Command in Norfolk, a 4-star admiral command in charge of all the ships in the Navy that are training stateside, they were running an exercise in 2014 to 2015. And he adds a little parenthetical here. He says, this is where Ryan Graves was operating. Ryan Graves, if you remember, is one of the Navy pilots who witnessed craft. He was tied to the some of the leaked videos that have come out.
Yeah.
So he says he was working at Norfolk when they were running those training exercises.
Got it. Okay.
So Ryan Graves was flying his F-18 Hornet Super Hornet off the USS Roosevelt. He said, I was the chief meteorologist of the Navy. And so all my meteorologists were on Navy ships like the USS Roosevelt forecasting weather. Very critical safety of flight mission. During that time, I received an email on the Navy secret network from my boss, a 2-star admiral, the operations officer at Fleet Forces Command, and all the addressees were 1- and 2-star admirals like me. I was in a support command, others were operational, like strike group commanders, Roosevelt, and others. The topic of the email was urgent safety of flight issue. And the content of the email was fairly brief. It just said, if any of you know what these are, tell me ASAP. We're having numerous near midair collisions, and we're going to have to shut the exercise down if they don't stop. And attached to that email was the Go Fast video that everyone has seen now.
Huh. Can you, like, I get them all mixed up in my mind. Can you remind me which one the Go Fast video was?
Yeah, it was the one from Ryan Graves' encounter on the Roosevelt.
Okay.
And it shows infrared footage of a spherical UAP. And, you know, the nose tracking camera is struggling to keep up with it. So you can see it trying to lock on. And when it does successfully lock on, you hear one of the pilots go, oh, got it! And a whole bunch of other videos from the same incident, they mention there's a whole fleet of them.
Wow.
So Gallaudet goes on. He says, F-18 pilots captured video of this UAP just scorching over the water. There's no flight control surfaces or propulsion means that are visible. It's just a little round sphere. And the pilots are all going crazy. And I knew right then and there that this was not ours. We don't have technology like that. I was read into a lot of special access programs. To the best of my knowledge, we would never do that in a training range, especially aircraft carrier workups, because they're so compressed. They have to do all these things. The pilots have to get certified. They have to land so many times on the carrier. They have to do all these things to certify to go deploy. So throwing out advanced technology in a training range during a pre-deployment workup just does not happen. I mean, people will get fired. And of course, we have testing ranges to do that. So I knew it wasn't ours. And I'd been reading all the threats, our adversaries' capabilities, and I knew nobody else had that. So I knew right then and there that this was something that was not ours, not human, off-world, whatever.
I love this. This is the most real, compelling description I have ever heard about why it could not be a US test, because it would fuck up the logistics of qualifying pilots and like it would cause problems. And like,
yeah, absolutely. No, it's one of those things. As an uninformed person, to my mind, I was like, well, wouldn't that be the perfect place to test it? We know the operational capabilities of our guys. So you
Yeah.
fly this thing through them, and if they can detect it, okay, now we know something. If they can't
Right.
detect it or respond appropriately, that's great. Like we have
Right.
a reasonable metric. But yeah, I had never really understood. Every time they talked to any of the Navy guys, they were adamant there is no world where anyone would do this during a training
Yeah.
exercise like this. And yeah, just like you, this is the first time I've ever heard anyone explain it in a way that made me go, yeah, actually, that
Yeah.
does make sense. I don't think anyone would do that. Like,
Yeah. Right. That's fascinating.
yeah, they're not just out there flying around for fun.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, back to Gallaudet's story. He says, the next day, the email was wiped from my computer and everyone else who received it. And by the way, it's clear through context. The fact that the email was wiped is not suspicious to him. This is a
Sure.
secure email system that can
Yeah.
happen sometimes when someone says they shouldn't, something they shouldn't have, but it's notable.
Yeah.
He said, I go to monthly meetings at my boss's headquarters in Norfolk, and we always talk about staying up with the training cycle, and safety issues always come up. And this was a big safety issue. The OPS officer said so, and my job as chief meteorologist in the Navy, another one of my hats, was safety of flight. And so we get into the next monthly meeting, and no one brings this stuff up. No one is talking about a safety issue, about almost canceling a major training event. I mean, this left Ryan and his fellow pilots having to develop their own mitigation measures themselves. This whole overclassification issue, if you want to call it that, that was forcing a failure of leadership that I couldn't, or my fellow admirals could not look out for Ryan and his fellow pilots. That is a problem. And that is something we have to correct. And that is why I'm speaking out about this. And I seriously don't know why other admirals who are retired aren't speaking up about it either.
Yeah. Okay. That's kind of beautiful. Like, you've talked about this story before, but I hadn't really understood that, like, the removal of that email and not talking about it would actually mean, like, a sudden disappearance of support from leadership for the pilots and, like, all the folks who are trying to certify during that time.
Right.
But
Right.
there's, like, serious safety issues happening that we can't talk about or resolve. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah, and he goes a little more into detail about it, but basically what it boils down to is he's like, I knew, and I'm sure everyone else knew, that what happened was we had stumbled over an SAP, a special access program. This is their territory. We're not supposed to be talking about it, so the email was redacted. But that means that we have a flight safety issue that we're not allowed to talk about because it's classified. And that's messed up. We have to be able to talk about flight safety issues even when there are security concerns. And the fact that this was just absolute from the top down, it was understood nobody's going to talk about this, that ain't right. And I think this is the vibe that we're getting kind of across the board from some of these high-level government and military people. These are people who are very comfortable with a degree of secrecy in the government. There are things that should be secret. What they're upset about is an over compartmentalization, an overly burdensome amount of secrecy that is causing other problems. And he even talks about this later. Like, look, if there's technology that we're getting from this, absolutely, that should be classified. The fact that non-human intelligence exists should not be classified. And that's where the problem lies. And I think we've talked about this from the perspective of Congress also. Congress isn't mad that the public doesn't know. They're mad that they don't know. They're supposed to know because Congress, for legitimate, real reasons, has oversight role of the executive branch because there have been abuses in the past. So now when they're like, you're not allowed to know about this, like, no, that ain't how this works. There is nothing you get to do that Congress doesn't get to know about. Now, that doesn't mean our good friend Timmy Burchett gets to know about it. But the Gang of Eight, the most senior leadership in Congress, is literally supposed to have access to absolutely fucking everything. And that's where you see this falling apart. And that's why it's a big deal when you see guys like Senator Schumer and who is on the Gang of Eight,
Yeah.
coming out and writing a major disclosure act and saying point blank, non-human intelligence exists and it should be declassified.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so Tim Gallaudet, Navy Rear Admiral, very qualified man, extreme levels of experience, and a sterling reputation, is putting his reputation on the line to talk about this wacky stuff. Why is he talking about USOs? And UAP are just kind of barely something we can talk about. USOs are barely in the conversation at all. Why is he staking his reputation on this? So, I mentioned he talked at the Soul Foundation. He also wrote a white paper for them. Now, to rewind a bit, if you don't remember, the Soul Foundation's purpose of existing is to be a government think tank to write proposals and help them shape policy around UAP. And they're planning to inform that from a science perspective. That's why Gary Nolan is involved.
Yeah.
The reason Tim Gallaudet is involved is because, hey, we need to make recommendations about this. And one of the recommendations is we should start looking in the oceans.
Yeah.
Now,
right.
He tells all sorts of great stories. He mentions that, if you look at Google Maps and you see the seafloor, you get this impression that we have mapped the sea.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, we absolutely have not. Maybe 25% of the global ocean has been sonar mapped, and maybe 5% of it has been charted with ROVs. Like, there are huge swaths of the ocean that we literally know nothing about. And I was kind of like, yeah, okay, we don't know anything about it, but it's like, it's seafloor. Like, what's there to know? There have been 2 major incidents where submarines collided with undersea mountains that they didn't see. That this caused, crew fatalities. It cost billions of dollars in repairing a submarine. It put us at risk of having a freaking nuclear reactor falling to the bottom of the ocean. Like, a mountain.
Yeah.
It's not like
we have no idea.
Little thing. Like, they're just cruising along and hit a mountain. Like, so yeah, I don't think I fully comprehended how unmapped the sea is. So when he's advocating for we should study USOs, part of what that means for him is we should be mapping this stuff. Like, we should be looking. They could have a freaking base off California and we'd never know because we just never looked,
Right. Yeah, I would be shocked if it was even 5% was charted with ROVs. Honestly, that would be a huge amount.
Yeah. So in his Soul Foundation talk, he explained a little bit about why this is worth going into. He said, where I want to go with scientific UAP research is somewhere that suits me, the undersea place. We have observed these objects going transmedium. And in fact, just in the year and a half or so that I've become active and have started interviewing people, I've met dozens of people, commercial, military, Coast Guard, mariners, and submariners who have had observations. This is happening, and I'm working to get a better understanding of it and get data.
I like this vibe we get from guys like Gary Nolan and Tim Gallaudet. Like, hey, there's a lot of smoke over there. I'm not saying there's a fire, but I'm saying we should probably look for a fire.
Right? Like,
do something.
Yeah, there's something going on, guys. Can we look at it, please? Now, from his Soul Foundation white paper, which, by the way, is a PDF that's freely available on the Soul Foundation's website. It's nice, easy read. I encourage everybody to go take a look at it. It's called Beneath the Surface. He says, research and attention regarding unidentified aerial phenomena are almost entirely focused on their aerial occurrences. Yet instances of UAP at sea, whether under the surface or traveling transmedium between the atmosphere and the ocean, are also known to occur. Perhaps the most widely publicized example was the Tic Tac UAP, described by Navy F-18 Super Hornet pilots as hovering above roiling ocean whitewater during their training exercise in 2004. Now, that whitewater may have indicated a larger UAP below, or that the observed UAP had just emerged from the sea, suggesting an unidentified submersible object.
Yeah, I'd totally forgotten there was something in the water with Tic Tac.
Right? Yeah, we get so
Yeah,
focused on the weird, you know, object that shouldn't be able to fly and is outperforming our pilots and reading their
right.
minds about where the cap point is that, yeah, we forget that when they showed up, there was evidence that something was disturbing the water that was a lot bigger than the Tic Tac.
Right. It's like I imagine we kind of like walk in to the room and we find two aliens who are quietly hiding something underneath the floorboards. We're like, quick, follow the aliens, and then just forget to ever come back. Like,
Yeah. Did someone want to look under the floorboards? Yeah.
no, no, okay, all right,
Yeah.
cool.
So he lists a few other ones. He says more recently, a transmedium UAP was observed by U.S. Navy personnel aboard the USS Omaha,
Hmm.
west of San Diego, in 2019.
Did I don't think I heard about this one.
We haven't really talked about it.
Okay.
I'll link the video in the show notes. I'll be honest with you, the video isn't that impressive. It's a white dot flying along above the sea, but
Okay.
it's infrared footage of
Yeah.
a UAP filmed in the controlled space around the ship. So they're
Mm,
tracking it because it's in their like airspace,
right.
and it's not like crashing into the sea. It's moving at speed against the wind over the ocean, but it's kind of slowly moving lower and lower as it goes on. And eventually it just disappears, which I don't think means it visually disappeared. Remember, this is an infrared camera. So what we're really seeing is the difference in temperature gradient from the surface of the
Right.
ocean and the object. So when it disappears, all that really means is it went under the water and you can't see the heat
Right.
from it anymore. But you can hear someone on the bridge yell, splash, splash, mark bearing and range. So they were actively monitoring this thing, and the crew of this ship found it notable that it entered the water.
That's really interesting. Has the Navy confirmed the authenticity of this video like they did for some of the others?
That's
I
a
like that they
great
were doing
question.
that.
I think they did, but I might be wrong about it. This one came from Jeremy Corbell, a filmmaker that we've talked about before.
Hmm.
So it was a leak, but I'm not sure if it has since been verified.
Okay, cool.
Back to Tim Gallaudet's white paper, he said,
Yeah.
the most dramatic example of an apparent transmedium UAP is the video from Aguadilla, Puerto Rico, captured by thermal imaging system on a U.S. Customs and Border Protection DHC-8 aircraft in 2013. Detailed analysis of the data by the Scientific Coalition of UAP Studies, SCU, reveals several potentially unexplainable aspects of this object. It was initially detected moving at a low level over a runway at Rafael Hernandez Airport, where its presence was so prominent that it delayed the departure of a commercial flight. Over 3 minutes, the object appears to fly at speeds between 40 and 120 miles per hour, enter and exit the Atlantic Ocean without any significant deceleration, reach a maximum underwater velocity of 95 miles per hour, and at one point split into two parts before entering the water again. No known aircraft, naval vessel, projectile, or human-made technology possess these characteristics or capabilities.
Yeah, no shit. It's a bit of an understatement.
Right?
Have you watched the video? Is it a good one?
I'll link the video in the show notes again. It's kind of weird. It's this weird, like, floating thing. It kind of doesn't look like anything. It's kind of like a jellyfish. It made a big splash in the UFO community when it came. Unintentional pun. It made a big splash in the community when it came out, but mostly because nobody could really say what it was. And, there were people trying to say it was a balloon, but that doesn't explain how it dips in and out of the water. It doesn't explain the speeds it was moving at. I think he kind of hit the nail on the head here. Like, nothing really explains this, and it doesn't match anything that we know about.
Yeah. Huh. I'm watching it a little bit now, and it kind of looks like those metal sphere videos.
Yeah. It's a strange video for sure.
Yeah.
Now, the last story he tells in his Soul Foundation white paper, he says Chris Stiles interviewed several Royal Canadian Navy divers who participated in a U.S.-Canadian joint minesweeping exercise off Shelburne Harbor, Nova Scotia in 1960. They claim to have observed two disc-shaped craft on the seabed. Furthermore, the divers claimed they not only saw the occupants of the two craft trying to repair them, but also recorded underwater footage of this extravehicular activity. It is only after the recent U.S. military UAP whistleblower testimony that this story seems credible.
Oh, can we see that? Where's that video?
I am not able to find it anywhere. Now,
Okay.
I'm just going to put a big old fat asterisk on this. Like all of the UFO stories from the 60s, it's been kicking around for a while.
Yeah.
It's super interesting. I would not go so far as to call it credible. I think
Okay.
Gallaudet's including it because it's one of the legendary stories about UFOs underwater. But we're down to testimony from two divers who claim footage exists that, to the best of my knowledge, no one has ever seen. Now,
Yeah.
he's spoken to other witnesses who claim to have been there. They said, oh, yeah, these divers came up out of the water in a hurry. For a moment, this group of ships was at DEFCON 1 due to the situation, which means they could have started a war.
Right.
But did it actually happen? I don't know.
It's kind of a shame. I would have liked to believe the Canadians would be more open about this stuff, but I don't know.
Well, let's move on to a more compelling story that Tim
Okay.
Gallaudet has shared a couple of times. He says, so a guy came to me and said, hey, I was on a sub in the 80s. I could talk to you about what I saw. He was a nuclear submarine officer in the North Atlantic. It was a very high sea state because of a storm, 40-foot waves. So they were operating below that. And even there, they were kind of rocking. Subs can feel that wave action. And because it was so rough, it created a lot of ambient noise. And in those conditions, it's really hard to passively detect another submarine. So they felt pretty secure. They weren't going to be detected by a Russian sub, and they probably weren't going to hear one either.
Sorry, I made a noise. I've been diving in 8-foot waves, and it is totally crazy to see our 45-foot boat bouncing around like it's nothing. And also, side note, getting back on to the boat in those conditions after a very long and exhausting dive is wild. But 40 foot is just that's the length of the ship. I just can't even imagine that.
Yeah. Now they were underwater, so presumably it's less churn down there, but
It is.
it's not no churned, you know?
Yeah. I mean, that's part of why our dive was so long and exhausting, because it's just moving under there too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So our guy's on watch, and all of a sudden they get a passive hit, a contact that's moving off the starboard. And then it paused and started closing on them rapidly. And they call that constant bearing, decreasing range.
What? That's like the most boring phrase for incoming.
Right? I freaking love it. It's so bland and technical. Constant bearing, decreasing range.
Yeah.
Gallaudet plays it down even more. He goes, you don't want that when you're a sub diver. That's going to be a collision. So it had every feature that a Russian torpedo would have in terms of constant bearing, decreasing range at a very rapid rate. And they were so convinced, he called the captain to the bridge. They set general quarters and they dived, and it kept on coming and it kept on coming. And they were hoping to get below some acoustic lens or whatever so that they wouldn't be able to find them and lose track. But it just kept coming. And they went as deep as just above crush depth.
Whoa. I have no idea how deep that is for a military sub, but it's got to be hella deep.
Yeah. Tim says, for those who don't know, crush depth is the depth that a submarine will implode. And that's a dangerous place to be on an older sub like this. But they were convinced this was a Russian sub coming after them. And then, at some range, close, it paused and then slowly took station on their stern behind them and trailed them for a while.
What is happening?
So they're getting this passive acoustic hit of something doing this. And then after a few minutes, it just rapidly departs the scene. There was no explanation. The Russians didn't have technology like this in the 80s. We didn't have technology like that. And again, to this day, he doesn't know. But when you go around the Navy and talk to other sonar techs, they say they do see these kinds of things quite often.
Holy shit. Are there, I don't know, are there recordings of this? I feel like that's been my like
Tim Gallaudet
catchphrase.
says the data from this encounter is collected and archived at Johns Hopkins University, and I am in the process of reinstating my clearance because I want to look into that.
Yes, that's awesome.
Apparently, he even referred this guy to Arrow.
Okay. Yeah, and nothing came of it.
Well, Arrow said they would look into the acoustic data sets, and nobody's heard anything from them since.
Acoustic data sets. Heard anything? I see what you did there. So it sounds like Gallaudet's at least pro disclosure.
Yeah, I mean, like most of these military guys, he's pro controlled disclosure.
Sure.
You know, he doesn't object to secrecy, but over compartmentalization that's causing other problems.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yeah, talking about disclosure, at the Seoul conference, he says, the Hill is doing it right. I was just approached by Representative Luna. She's interested in having another field hearing, this time on USO's undersea UAP. And that's good. So there's action being taken.
I can't believe that our hopes and dreams for disclosure rest on Tim Burchett and Luna, but here we are.
Here we are. And he goes on, he says, well, but what about the executive branch? Well, this is where things aren't going well. You have this big disconnect between the story Grush told and, of course, Arrow office under Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick. And why is that? Well, it's not complicated. Sean can't do and say things without clearance from the SecDef, and above him, the National Security Council of the White House, and likely the ODNI. This White House does not want to disclose. That's their policy, and Sean is merely following that suit.
I mean, it makes sense. But I mean, it's surprising, I guess, that the White House is blocking disclosure, or at least that's what he's thinking. Is that right?
Yeah, so he explained it a little bit more in an interview with Liberation Times. He said, the DoD moves in the direction the National Security Council says to, and at the direction of the president. Now, a lot of people will blame Arrow for not being fully open and transparent, but their direction comes right from the National Security Council, and that's coming from the White House. The latest Arrow report showed that they want to keep knowledge of UAP unacknowledged, which makes sense. This president right now is not looking great in the polls, and I wouldn't think that he would want to disclose to the public all of a sudden in this election year that, hey, we don't know what's in our airspace or water space, and we can't control it. Have a good day, America.
Side note, it has now been about 30 minutes, maybe an hour, since the whole thing about Biden pulling out of the race. So this quote made a lot more sense when Scott wrote it last night.
Yeah. Maybe Biden could go rogue now. Like, all right, you guys don't want me to be president? Guess what?
Yeah, right. Let's go.
I'm declassifying a whole lot of shit.
Oh, God, how great would that be?
It would be awesome.
Anyway, so that totally makes sense. But I thought the White House was involved in the UAP Disclosure Act.
Yeah, you're not wrong. So this is a little confusing because we have heard from different people about who is to blame for the UAP Disclosure Act getting gutted. The word on the street was that the White House was not only endorsing, but actively involved in creating it. And it makes sense, right? Like a guy like Senator Schumer, who is arguably the second most powerful Democrat on the planet, is not going to, go rogue and do something without talking to the president. So if he's backing this measure, he's at least talking to the president about it. Liberation Times said, quote, we understand from multiple sources that individuals within the White House were supportive of the UAPDA and coordinated with Senator Chuck Schumer. So I don't know, like what Gallaudet says makes sense, right? Kirkpatrick has a chain of command above him. He is in the executive branch, and the top of the executive branch is the president. Nobody's denying that. But I do think Gallaudet is being a little willfully obtuse about this. Like the claim from Grush and others is that there are essentially rogue elements in the government. And the picture that we've been painting the whole time in this podcast is there appears to be a tug of war in the government over whether to disclose or not. That dates all the way back to 47. Like, we talked about the history of UFO investigations and how, like, one department would put out a report that says UFOs are real and they're alien, and then the next group would come in and fire everyone who wrote that report and burn all the copies. Like, this has been going on since day one. So it doesn't surprise me to find out, to see an implication. I don't know if it's Sean Kirkpatrick going rogue, but that somewhere in the chain of command between the president and Sean Kirkpatrick, there may be a break that allows us to have members of the White House are actively coordinating with Schumer to write UAP Disclosure Act. And meanwhile, members of the DOD are actively working to suppress the truth. I don't find that to be incompatible.
Surprising.
Although I understand how, on paper, in theory, these people at the DOD take their orders from the president. I'm not sure the president is in at the DOD day to day saying, yo, you better suppress this shit.
Right. I was literally just having a conversation an hour or two ago with a friend about how even at a 2,000 person company, like, I'm not sure that the C-suite really, like, their direction actually translates down very far. I cannot 100%. Even imagine like the US government.
It's a whole different thing, right? And this was Lou Elizondo's whole thing, right? Like, he was saying he wanted to brief the SecDef, and he was not allowed to. His chain of command blocked him from taking UAP reports up the chain of command. They were like, no, this doesn't go any further. And they're not breaking the law. They're not doing anything illegal. That's what the chain of command is for.
Right.
But it can be super frustrating if you think your mid-level boss is an impediment. You don't really have the ability to skip a chain of command like that in the military, the way that, like, if I'm at a company and my boss is blocking me, I might run into the VP in the hallway and say something, it's a little different in the DOD.
Yeah, I slack our CTO every so often, and like, I don't know. I don't think they can just slack the president.
Yeah, I doubt Biden's super active. Maybe he's on Discord.
Yeah, maybe on Discord. Hey, speaking of, no, this is great. I'm looking forward to hearing more about Tim Gallaudet. I hope that his name has the same kind of recognition that Carl Nell and Grush end up having. It sounds like a really top-notch guy to keep an eye on.
Yeah, he feels very similar to Lou Elizondo to me, right? Like, here's a military insider who has left and now thinks that there need to be people pressuring the government to make change. I'm all in favor of that. And it sounds like, since coming out publicly about this, he's got people coming to him, getting witness testimony. He has referred some people to Aero. He's working with Soul Foundation, Americans for Safe Aerospace. Yeah, he seems like a good guy. I want to wrap it up here. I know Chuck wants to talk about Discord apparently, but one last quote here from Gallaudet. He said, "Let's get a policy of disclosure. I realize some technology might have to remain classified, but the fact that we're being visited by non-human intelligence, the public should know this, and we should develop policy regarding our response to that."
Heck yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds great. Let's do that.
All right. Well, that's our episode about Tim Gallaudet. Was there something you wanted to say about Discord?
I don't know. I was just looking right now. And I don't think there is something I want to say.
All right. Well, in that case, thank you all for joining us on It's a Very Exciting Time. You can find show notes and more on our website, veryexcitingtime.com, as well as links to our social media accounts.
And you can feel free to email us at scott or chuck@veryexcitingtime.com. And if you'd like to support the show, please check out our Patreon at patreon.com/veryexcitingtime, where you can find other awesome content like our Q&As and a link to our Discord, which is hopping, and we're getting messages right now during the show. It is very distracting, and I like it a lot.
All right. And Chuck, as always, My wife thanks you for listening to me talk about UFOs, so she doesn't have to.